Hey guys, tonight you wake up as a 15-year-old boy in Edo period Japan, and your life just got sold to the highest bidder. There's a man with painted nails counting coins while eyeing your hips. We'll get to why that man is about to destroy any chance you had at a normal existence. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Congratulations! You've just become what the Japanese called a kagima, which sounds elegant until you realize it translates roughly to shadow room boy. You're about to enter a world where your body isn't yours. Your name gets changed to something flowery, and your entire existence revolves around pleasing men who have enough money to rent you by the hour. Your family sold you. Let's be clear about this. They didn't reluctantly give you up due to tragic circumstances. They needed rice money, and you were worth about the same as a decent horse. Maybe less, depending on how pretty you were. The going rate for a young boy in 1650 was around 10 ryo, which could feed a family for months. Your parents probably celebrated after the transaction. The man who bought you runs what they politely call a chaya, a tea house. Think again if you imagine cozy conversations over green tea. These establishments were brothels, specifically ones that catered to men who preferred the company of other males. Your new owner, let's call him Yamada-san, has been in this business for 20 years. His fingernails are longer than your mother's, painted red, and he smells like expensive incense mixed with something that might be opium. You're standing in the entrance of what will become your prison. The wooden floors are polished to a shine that reflects the paper lanterns hanging from the ceiling. Everything looks elegant, refined even. The walls are decorated with paintings of cherry blossoms and cranes. It's designed to make wealthy customers feel sophisticated about what they're really here to do. Yamada-san circles you like your livestock, which, congratulations, you basically are now. He lifts your chin, examines your teeth, checks your hands for calluses. Too many calluses mean you've done manual labor, and that's not the look he's going for. His customers want boys who look like they've never held anything heavier than a fan. You'll need a new name, he says, his voice soft but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Kume, little plum blossom. You want to laugh because your real name was Taro, which means firstborn son. Now you're a fruit. The irony would be amusing if your stomach wasn't churning with the realization that your old identity just got erased with 2 words. Your hair gets the first makeover. In regular Japanese society, boys your age would have their heads partially shaved in the traditional style. But kagima keep their hair long, styled like women's hair. An old woman with hands like leather takes a razor to your scalp, carefully shaving your crown while leaving the rest to grow. It's called sakayaki, and it's specifically designed to make you look feminine while still being obviously male. Your customers, apparently, enjoy the ambiguity. The clothing comes next. You're stripped of your rough cotton work clothes and dressed in a silk kimono. The fabric is beautiful, deep blue with silver threads woven in patterns of flowing water. It feels incredible against your skin, softer than anything you've ever worn. Of course, it's also worth more than your entire family made in a year, which means you'll be working it off for the next decade. But wait, it gets worse. The obi, the wide sash that holds the kimono closed, it's tied in front instead of in back. This isn't a fashion choice. It's advertising. When a woman ties her obi in front, it means she's a prostitute. Same rule applies to you. Everyone who sees you walking down the street will know exactly what you do for money. Your face gets painted next. White powder covers your natural skin tone, creating that porcelain doll effect that's considered the height of beauty. Red paint goes on your lips, not just a little color, but a full dramatic mouth that can be seen from across a room. Black coal lines your eyes, making them appear larger and more feminine. The transformation is complete when they dust rouge on your cheeks. You catch your reflection in a polished bronze mirror and don't recognize yourself. The boy who walked in here an hour ago is gone. In his place is something that looks like a cross between a woman and a child, painted and dressed for purposes you're only beginning to understand. Your room is tiny, barely large enough for a sleeping mat and a small table. The walls are paper thin, which means you'll hear everything that happens in the rooms around you. And trust me, you don't want to hear what happens in the rooms around you. The sounds that drift through those walls at night will haunt your dreams for years to come. Yamada-san explains the rules. You don't leave the chaya without permission. You don't refuse customers unless they're violent enough to damage the merchandise, which is you. You hand over every coin you earn. You practice the shamisen, a 3-stringed instrument, because customers like musical entertainment before they get to the main event. You learn to pour tea gracefully, to recite poetry, to giggle at jokes that aren't funny. And you learn to endure things that would make a grown man weep. Let's talk about your typical day, because routine is what keeps you from losing your mind completely. You wake up around noon, if you're lucky enough to have slept at all. Your first customer might have left at dawn, or he might still be snoring next to you, his breath reeking of sake and poor dental hygiene. Either way, you slip out quietly and make your way to the communal washing area. The other boys are already there, scrubbing themselves raw with harsh soap and cold water. There's Hanakoji, who's been here 3 years and has the dead eyes of someone who's seen too much. There's Midori, barely 14, who still cries himself to sleep every night. And there's Sakura, the star of the establishment, who's learned to smile while his soul dies a little more each day. You wash the paint off your face and the smell of strangers off your skin, but some stains go deeper than soap can reach. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. There are bruises on your arms from hands that gripped too tight, marks on your neck from teeth that bit too hard. This is normal. This is your life now. Breakfast is rice and miso soup, if you're lucky. Sometimes there's fish, usually the cheap stuff that's been sitting around too long. You eat quickly and in silence, because talking about what happened the night before is discouraged. Yamada-san doesn't want his boys dwelling on unpleasant realities. He wants them focused on the next customer, the next coin, the next performance. After breakfast comes training. You practice walking in those restrictive kimono, small shuffling steps that are considered graceful. You learn to kneel properly, back straight, hands folded, eyes downcast. You practice conversation, the art of listening to boring men talk about their boring lives while looking fascinated by every word. The shamisen lessons are the worst part. Your fingers bleed from the strings until they develop calluses, which then get filed down because customers don't want to feel rough hands during intimate moments. You learn melancholy songs about lost love and cherry blossoms. Ironic, considering you'll never experience the first and rarely see the second from inside your paper prison. Afternoon brings the preparation ritual. Another bath, more scrubbing, fresh paint on your face. The makeup routine becomes second nature, like putting on armor before battle. White powder to hide your humanity. Red lips to promise pleasures you don't want to give. Black lines around your eyes to make them look larger and more vulnerable. Your kimono for the evening depends on the season and the expected clientele. Spring means pastels and flower patterns. Summer brings lighter fabrics and cooling colors. Autumn calls for deeper hues, oranges and reds like dying leaves. Winter demands rich, dark colors that suggest warmth, even when you feel nothing but cold inside. The customers start arriving around sunset. They're merchants mostly, successful enough to afford your services, but not wealthy enough for the high-class courtesans in the pleasure districts. Some are married men looking for something their wives won't provide. Others are young samurai with more money than sense and a taste for forbidden pleasures. Your first customer tonight is Tanaka-san, a rice merchant with soft hands and a softer belly. He's been coming here for months, always asks for you specifically. He likes to pretend you're lovers, calls you his little plum blossom with genuine affection in his voice. It would be sweet if it weren't so completely delusional. He brings gifts, small things like hair ornaments or sweet cakes. You accept them graciously, thank him with the proper degree of gratitude. Inside, you're calculating how much these trinkets are worth, how many coins Yamada-san will deduct from your earnings for accepting them. Nothing is free in this place, not even kindness. Tanaka-san wants to talk first, always wants to talk. He tells you about his wife, who's been cold to him since their last child was born. He complains about his business rivals, the weather, the price of good sake. You listen and nod and make appropriate sounds of sympathy while pouring tea with hands that learned grace through repetition and fear. The conversation eventually turns to poetry. Tanaka-san fancies himself a cultured man, recites classical verses about the beauty of youth and the sadness of fleeting time. The irony is lost on him completely. He's paying to destroy the very youth he claims to worship, but pointing that out wouldn't be good for business. When he finally reaches for you, his hands are gentle but insistent. He's not cruel, just selfish, which somehow makes it worse. Cruelty you could hate. This casual disregard for your humanity is harder to process. He sees you as a beautiful object, something to be enjoyed and put away when he's finished. What happens next isn't rape, technically. You're being paid. You don't say no. But consent given under these circumstances isn't really consent at all. It's survival wrapped in silk and perfumed with incense. You close your eyes and let your mind drift somewhere else, a technique you've perfected over the months since your arrival. Afterward, Tanaka-san holds you like you're something precious, whispers about how beautiful you are, how much you mean to him. The words feel like insects crawling on your skin. He leaves extra coins on the table, a tip for exceptional service, and kisses your forehead before departing into the night. You lie there in the dark, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Your body feels hollow, like something essential has been scooped out and discarded. This emptiness is worse than pain, because pain, at least, proves you're still alive. The night isn't over. There will be other customers, other performances, other moments of practiced intimacy with strangers who see you as entertainment. Some will be gentle like Tanaka-san. Others will be rough, demanding, cruel. You'll smile for all of them because that's what you're paid to do. Between customers, you sit in your tiny room and stare at the wall. Sometimes you try to remember your family, your real name, what it felt like to be a person instead of a commodity. But those memories are fading, replaced by the endless routine of paint and silk and practiced submission. The other boys cope in different ways. Hanakoji drinks himself into oblivion whenever he can steal sake from the kitchen. Midori cuts himself with stolen razor blades, thin lines on his arms hidden beneath long sleeves. Sakura has learned to dissociate completely, his mind floating somewhere above his body, while strangers use it for their pleasure. You haven't found your coping mechanism yet. Maybe you never will. Maybe the trick is learning to live without coping, to exist in a state of constant, low-level trauma that becomes as natural as breathing. It's not living, exactly, but it's surviving, which is about all you can hope for in this place. Dawn eventually comes, as it always does. Your last customer of the night stumbles away, leaving behind the usual mixture of coins and shame. You wash again, scrub away the evidence of the night's work, and collapse onto your sleeping mat. If you're lucky, you'll get a few hours of dreamless sleep before the cycle starts again. But sleep doesn't always come. Sometimes you lie there listening to the sounds of the awakening city, wondering what happened to the boy who used to be named Taro. He's gone, you know that much. In his place is Kumi, the little plum blossom, painted and perfumed and trained to please. The transformation is complete, irreversible. Let's be clear about something. This isn't a story about forbidden love or exotic pleasures. This is a story about systematic exploitation, about a society that created an entire class of people whose only value was their ability to satisfy the desires of others. The Edo period's male prostitution industry was vast, organized, and completely legal. The shogunate actually regulated these establishments, collected taxes on the transactions, issued licenses to operate. Your suffering wasn't a byproduct of the system. It was the system working exactly as designed. Young boys were commodities, bought and sold like rice or silk, their bodies and souls consumed by customers who could afford the price of admission. Meanwhile, your family back in the village probably tells people you died. It's easier than explaining where you really went, what you really became. Easier than admitting they sold their son to strangers for money. The shame would be unbearable, so they create a more palatable fiction. You died of fever, perhaps, or drowned in the river. Anything but the truth. Your former friends have forgotten you by now, moved on with their lives, learned trades, maybe even gotten married. They're becoming the men they were always meant to be, while painted and dressed like a do sometimes, usually unsuccessful for the course. You could try to escape. Voice amusement of painfully. The ones who get caught are beaten and sold to establishments further from your frozen in this artificial adolescence customers. Of no one and have no hope of help. Their home villages, places where they know play melancholy songs on, is the ability to pour tea gracefully or well to the outside world. What usudo you explain the gap in your education. The years skills you're learning here don't translate integrate into normal society. The beggars or thieves, marked by the shamisen, how their experiences, unable to ones who succeed in getting away, often end up as spent in service that can't be mentioned in polite company. You're being trained for one specific purpose, and that training makes you unfit for anything else. Which brings us to the economic reality of your situation. Every coin you earn goes to pay off your purchase price, plus interest, plus room and board, plus the cost of your clothing and cosmetics, plus a dozen other fees that seem to multiply whenever you get close to breaking even. The math is designed to keep you here forever debt, always owing, always in more than you can possibly earn. Yamada-san keeps careful records in a ledger bound in silk. Your name, your age, your earnings, your expenses, all reduced to numbers in neat columns. You're not allowed to see this ledger, of course, but you know it exists because it's the book that owns the other boys. Whisper about it in the dark. In life, that decides your fate with cold mathematical precision. The customers don't think about any of this. To them, you're a luxury service, a beautiful boy who provides entertainment and pleasure. They tip well when you perform adequately, complain to the management when you don't. Some develop genuine affection for you, or at least what they think is affection. They bring gifts, write their undying love, while poems declare never once questioning the system that delivered you into their hands. Some develop a twisted sense of possessiveness, sending letters to Yamada-san asking to reserve your time exclusively. They don't understand that exclusivity costs extra, and even then, you're not theirs. You're the establishment's property, on loan for however long they can afford to pay. The worst customers are the ones who try to save you. They whisper about taking you away from this life, setting you up in a small house somewhere, making you their kept boy. They think they're being romantic. You know they're just describing a different kind of prison, one with prettier bars and the illusion of choice. There's Watanabe-san, a sake brewer who visits twice a month. He always talks about his dead son, how you remind him of the boy who died of smallpox at age 13. The resemblance is purely in his mind, but you nod and let him call you by his son's name while he holds you. It's disturbing on multiple levels, but his coins spend the same as everyone else's. Then there's Matsuda-san, a young samurai barely older than you, who comes in drunk and crying about his arranged marriage to a woman he's never met. He wants comfort, someone to tell him everything will be fine. You provide that comfort with the same mechanical efficiency you provide everything else. His problems seem abstract and distant compared to your daily reality of painted faces and rented flesh. The seasonal changes affect your work in ways you never expected. Summer brings the festival season, which means more customers with more money burning holes in their pouches. The heat makes the face paint run, leaves you constantly dabbing sweat with silk handkerchiefs. Your kimono sticks to your skin, and the small rooms become stifling boxes that trap the smell of incense and bodies and desperation. Winter is worse in different ways. The cold seeps through the paper walls, and heating is expensive, so you shiver in thin silk while pretending to be warm and inviting. Customers want to huddle under quilts, which means longer sessions in closer quarters. The intimacy feels more invasive when you're pressed together for warmth, skin against skin with nowhere to retreat. Your body starts changing in ways that terrify you. You're 15, almost 16 now, which means you're aging out of your prime market value. The customers who prefer very young boys are starting to look past you toward the newer arrivals. Midori, who once seemed impossibly young, now has competition from boys who look like children playing dress-up. Yamada-san notices your declining popularity with the cold efficiency of a businessman tracking inventory. He starts offering you at reduced rates, bundling your services with more popular boys, anything to keep the revenue flowing. The mathematics of your existence become cruelly clear. You're a depreciating asset with a limited shelf life. Your voice is changing too, cracking at inappropriate moments, dropping into registers that remind customers you're becoming a man instead of remaining the eternal boy they're paying for. You try to speak softly, to maintain the higher tones that suggest youth and femininity, but biology doesn't care about market demand. The other boys who've been here longer whisper about what happens when you're too old for the kagema trade. Some get sold to different establishments that cater to men who prefer older partners. Others are turned out onto the streets with nothing but the clothes on their backs and skills that don't translate to legitimate work. The lucky ones find patrons willing to set them up as kept men, but luck is a rare commodity in your world. Hanokoji turned 18 last month and disappeared one morning without warning. His sleeping mat was rolled up, his few possessions gone, no goodbye or explanation. The other boys avoided talking about it, but you all understood. He'd reached the end of his usefulness here. Whether he found something better or something worse, nobody knows, and nobody asks. The replacement arrived 3 days later. A boy named Ichiro, barely 14, with the same terrified eyes you remember from your first day. Watching him get painted and dressed and renamed brought back memories you tried to bury. The cycle continues, fresh meat to replace the aging stock, an endless supply of poverty and desperation feeding the machine. Your education in the arts continues even as your market value declines. The shamisen lessons become more intensive, as if musical skill can compensate for lost youth. You learn new songs, sadder ones about autumn leaves and fading beauty, the irony so thick you could choke on it. Your fingers develop the calluses that get filed down nightly, only to grow back harder each time. You also learn the tea ceremony properly, not just the simplified version for entertaining customers, but the full formal ritual, with all its precise movements and spiritual significance. It's beautiful in its own way, this meditation on impermanence and the fleeting nature of all things. The customers appreciate the authenticity. even if they don't understand the deeper meanings. Calligraphy becomes another skill in your arsenal. You practice writing poetry with brush and ink, your hand growing steady despite the trembling in your soul. The poems you copy are about love and loss, natural enough subjects for someone in your position. You become particularly good at writing the character for loneliness, having plenty of personal experience to draw from. But these accomplishments feel hollow when you remember they're just different ways to make you more appealing to buyers. Every skill you acquire, every talent you develop, serves the same ultimate purpose: keeping customers satisfied and money flowing into Yamada-san's ledger. You're not becoming educated or cultured. You're being fine-tuned as a product. The religious festivals provide brief respites from the routine, though even these carry their own complications. During Obin, when families honor their ancestors, the establishment closes for 3 days. You spend the time cleaning, mending clothes, and trying to remember what your own ancestors might have been like before poverty drove their descendants to this. Some of the boys use these breaks to visit shrines, praying for deliverance or at least endurance. You go through the motions, tossing coins into offering boxes and clapping your hands before wooden altars. But the gods feel very far away from your painted world of silk and shame. If they exist at all, they seem to have more pressing concerns than the fate of a few dozen boys selling their bodies in Ito's back alleys. The new year brings its own rituals. The establishment gets decorated with pine branches and sacred ropes, as if blessing a business built on exploitation could somehow sanctify it. Customers give larger tips during the holiday season, and Yamada-san distributes small bonuses to his stable of boys. It's profit sharing, not generosity, but you take what you can get. Your debt continues to grow despite your earnings. The cost of living in the Chaya includes not just room and board, but clothing, cosmetics, medical care when you get sick or injured, and various administrative fees that seem to multiply whenever you ask questions. The silk kimonos you wear cost more than most people make in months, and you're responsible for maintaining them in perfect condition. When a customer accidentally tears your sleeve during an enthusiastic encounter, the repair costs come out of your earnings. When you catch a cold and can't work for 3 days, you're charged for the lost revenue, as well as the herbal medicines that restore you to working condition. Every aspect of your existence has been monetized, every breath calculated against potential profit. The medical examinations are particularly humiliating. A doctor visits monthly to check for diseases that could affect the establishment's reputation. You're inspected like livestock, prodded and examined in ways that somehow feel more violating than anything the customers do. The physician makes notes in a ledger, documenting your health status alongside recommendations for treatments or restrictions. You've been lucky so far, avoiding the pox and other ailments that can destroy a boy's career overnight. But you've seen what happens to those less fortunate. They disappear as quickly as Hanakoji, though usually with less dignity and even fewer options. Disease in your line of work isn't just illness, it's economic catastrophe. The hierarchy among the boys becomes more apparent as you learn to navigate the establishment's social structure. Sakura remains at the top, his popularity seemingly immune to age, though you notice he started using more makeup to hide the lines around his eyes. Below him are the rising stars, boys who've learned to perfect the balance between innocence and experience that customers crave. Then there are the middle ranks, experienced enough to handle difficult customers, but not special enough to command premium rates. You're sliding into this category faster than you'd like to admit. At the bottom are the newest arrivals and the aging failures, boys who work harder for less money and know their time is running short. Competition between the boys is subtle but constant. You learn to undermine rivals through carefully placed suggestions to customers, mentioning that Midori seemed tired last night, or that the new boy, Ichiro, might not be experienced enough for more demanding clients. It's survival, not cruelty, though the distinction becomes increasingly meaningless. The establishment has its own internal economy of favors and information. Boys who overhear useful gossip from customers can trade it for better room assignments or advance warning about difficult clients. Those who master special skills, like massage or particular sexual techniques, can charge premium rates that benefit everyone's bottom line. You discover you have a talent for listening, for making customers feel heard and understood. It's a marketable skill in a world where wealthy men often feel isolated despite their privilege. They pay premium rates for the illusion of emotional connection, for someone who nods sympathetically while they complain about wives who don't understand them, or business rivals who don't respect them. This talent keeps you relevant even as your physical youth fades. Customers start requesting you specifically for conversation as much as physical services. You become the boy they confide in, the one who remembers their birthdays and asks about their children. It's emotional labor disguised as entertainment, but it pays the bills. Of course, emotional intimacy with customers creates its own problems. Some begin to believe the performance is real, that you actually care about their mundane troubles and petty concerns. They want to extend the fantasy beyond the walls of the chaya, to pretend you're friends or lovers rather than seller and buyer. Managing these delusions becomes part of your job. You have to be intimate enough to justify the premium rates, but distant enough to maintain boundaries. Too much emotional involvement, and customers become possessive, jealous, demanding. Too little, and they find more engaging companions elsewhere. The balancing act exhausts you more than the physical demands ever did. At least when someone rents your body, the transaction is clear and finite. When they rent your emotions, the boundaries become fuzzy. The performance never truly ends. You find yourself slipping into character, even when alone, unsure where Kumi ends and whatever remains of Taro begins. Your original personality feels like something you wore in childhood, outgrown and discarded. The boy who worried about his family's rice harvest and dreamed of learning. A trade has been replaced by someone who can discuss poetry while calculating tip percentages, who can feign orgasms with the skill of a professional actor. Sometimes you catch glimpses of your former self in unguarded moments. When you hear children playing in the street outside, their laughter reminds you of games you used to play with village friends whose names you can barely remember. When you smell rice cooking, you think of your mother's hands shaping onigiri for your lunch. These memories feel like artifacts from someone else's life. The other boys have similar moments of recognition and loss. Midori still cries in his sleep sometimes, calling out names that might be siblings or parents. Ichiro flinches when touched unexpectedly, his body remembering a time when physical contact meant comfort rather than commerce. These reflexes fade with time and training, but they never disappear completely. Winter deepens into the coldest months, and heating costs force the boys to share sleeping spaces for warmth. You find yourself curled against Midori's back, both of you seeking comfort that has nothing to do with sex or performance. It's human contact stripped of commercial purpose, precious because it's rare and freely given. These moments of genuine connection feel dangerous because they remind you what you've lost. It's easier to stay numb, to treat every touch as a transaction, every smile as a mask. Caring about the other boys means acknowledging your shared humanity, and humanity is a luxury you can't afford in this place. The ledger that controls your life grows thicker as Yamada-san adds new entries. Medical expenses from your recent cold. Replacement costs for a kimono that couldn't be properly cleaned after a customer's enthusiasm left permanent stains. Training fees for advanced shamisen lessons. Interest on your original purchase price, compounding monthly like a mathematical curse. You're not allowed to see the actual numbers, but you can feel them pressing down like physical weight. Every coin you earn disappears into calculations you don't understand, managed by a system designed to keep you perpetually indebted. Freedom isn't just distant, it's mathematically impossible under the current arrangement. Some boys try to earn extra money through side arrangements, private meetings with customers outside the establishment. It's strictly forbidden and severely punished when discovered, but desperation drives people to take risks. You've considered it yourself, wondering if direct payment might accelerate your path to independence. But the risks are enormous. Customers who meet boys privately often expect services that wouldn't be tolerated in the regulated environment of the Chaya. Without Yamada-san's protection, such as it is, you'd be completely vulnerable to violence or exploitation worse than what you already endure. The few boys who've tried usually end up hurt, broke, or both. Your 18th birthday approaches like an execution date. The customers who prefer very young partners have already started looking elsewhere, and your rates have been quietly reduced twice in the past month. Yamada-san watches you with the calculating gaze of someone deciding whether an asset is worth maintaining or should be liquidated. The other boys who survive to 18 face a grim sorting process. Some get transferred to establishments that cater to men who prefer mature partners, trading one form of exploitation for another. Others are sold to private households as servants, their sexual experience making them valuable in ways that have nothing to do with cleaning floors or preparing meals. The worst fate awaits those whose debts have grown too large to ever repay. They become permanent residents of the Chaya, aging Kagima, who service the customers no one else wants to touch. You've seen them in the establishment's back rooms, men in their 20s and 30s still painted like boys, their faces grotesque parodies of youth stretched over adult features. Yamada-san calls you into his office on a gray morning in early spring. The room smells like old paper and the bitter tea he drinks to aid his digestion. He's wearing a silk kimono decorated with cranes. The pattern, so expensive, represents more money than your family saw in years. His painted nails tap against the lacquered surface of his desk while he studies the ledger that contains your life. Kuma-kun, he says, using the diminutive that once made you cringe, but now barely registers. Your 18th birthday approaches. We need to discuss your future. You kneel on the tatami mat before his desk, hands folded properly in your lap, eyes downcast in the posture of submission you've perfected over 3 years. The silk of your kimono, pale green with white cherry blossoms, whispers against itself as you settle into position. Everything about your appearance has been calculated to project femininity and youth, but you can feel time winning its war against cosmetics and careful lighting. Your debt stands at 47 ryo, Yamada-san continues, his voice carrying the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. This includes your original purchase price, interest, room and board, clothing, cosmetics, medical care, and training costs. Your earnings have been satisfactory, but insufficient to cover these expenses. 47 ryo. The number hits you like a physical blow. When you arrived, your purchase price was 10 ryo. Somehow, despite earning money every night for 3 years, you now owe nearly 5 times that amount. The mathematics of exploitation reveal themselves in stark clarity. However, he adds, setting down his teacup with delicate precision, I have received an offer that might benefit us both. Nakamura-san, the silk merchant, has expressed interest in establishing you in a small house as his kept boy. He's prepared to pay your debt in full, plus a modest premium. Nakamura-san, you remember him well. A man in his 50s with soft hands and expensive tastes, married to a woman who bore him 4 daughters but no sons. He visits monthly, always requesting your services, always leaving generous tips. His breath smells like the expensive tooth powder imported from China, and he has a habit of stroking your hair while you pretend to sleep afterward. The arrangement would be exclusive, Yamada-san explains. You would live in a house he maintains for such purposes. Your duties would include companionship, entertainment, and whatever other services he requires. In exchange, he would provide food, clothing, and a small allowance for personal expenses. It sounds like freedom, almost. A house instead of a single room. One man instead of dozens. The possibility of walking outside without permission, of choosing what to eat for breakfast, of spending an entire day without having your face painted. But you've learned to examine offers carefully, to look for the hidden costs that always exist. What happens when he grows tired of me? You ask, keeping your voice carefully neutral. Yamada-san smiles, showing teeth stained yellow from decades of tea and tobacco. That would be between you and Nakamura-san. The debt would be paid. Your obligations to this establishment would be complete. There it is. The trap hidden beneath the promise of liberation. You would trade one form of bondage for another, exchanging the security of the Chaya's regulated environment for complete dependence on a single man's whims. When Nakamura-san inevitably discarded you, you would be cast out with nothing but the clothes on your back and skills that mark you as a former prostitute. I need time to consider, you say, though you already know you have no real choice. Of course. Take until tomorrow evening. Nakamura-san expects an answer by then. You bow properly and back out of the room, your heart hammering against your ribs. In the hallway, Sakura waits with the expression of someone who's overheard everything. At 22, he's ancient by the standards of your trade, his popularity maintained through skill and reputation rather than youthful beauty. His face paint can't quite hide the lines around his eyes anymore. Nakamura-san, eh? He says, falling into step beside you. Could be worse. He's not violent, and silk merchants have steady income. I've heard of boys who did well in such arrangements, and boys who didn't. Sakura shrugs, a gesture that speaks volumes. Life is risk, Kume-kun. Here, there, makes little difference in the end. That night, you lie awake listening to the sounds of the establishment around you. Midori entertaining a customer in the next room, their conversation muffled by thin walls, but the rhythm unmistakably commercial. Footsteps in the hallway, as late arrivals seek their purchased pleasures. The distant sound of a shamisen being played badly by one of the newer boys still learning his craft. You try to imagine life in Nakamura-san's house. A real kitchen where you might learn to cook proper meals instead of surviving on rice and whatever scraps the establishment provides. A garden where you could grow vegetables or flowers. Something beautiful that exists for its own sake rather than to attract customers. A bath you could use whenever you wanted, washing away the paint and perfume that have become like a second skin. But you also remember Nakamura-san's hands, the way he grips your wrists when he's excited, the strange things he whispers in your ear during intimate moments. His fantasies involve scenarios that make you uncomfortable even by the standards of your current profession. In the Chaya, you have backup. If a customer becomes too demanding or violent, you can call for help. Alone in his house, you would be completely at his mercy. The next evening arrives with the inevitability of sunset. You present yourself to Yamada-san's office wearing your finest kimono, face painted with extra care, hair arranged in an elaborate style that took an hour to perfect. If this is to be your last night as Kun the Kagema, you want to look the part one final time. I accept Nakamura-san's offer, you say, the words feeling like stones in your mouth. Yamada-san nods as if he never doubted your decision. Wise choice. Nakamura-san will collect you tomorrow afternoon. He's provided clothing and cosmetics appropriate to your new position. You may keep one personal item from your time here. One item. 3 years of your life reduced to a single memento. You think of the small mirror that belonged to your mother, the only thing you brought from your village. It's cracked now, the silver backing spotted with age, but it still reflects your painted face with cruel honesty. Your last customer that night is a young samurai barely older than yourself, drunk on sake and melancholy about his coming marriage to a woman he's never met. He holds you afterward with desperate intensity, as if you might disappear if he loosens his grip. In a way, you suppose you will. I wish I could take you with me. He whispers against your neck. Keep you in my house. Protect you from all this. Another savior complex. Another man who sees you as a beautiful victim rather than a person capable of making choices. You've heard these promises before, usually from customers who feel guilty about the transaction they've just completed. They never follow through. By morning, they've returned to their real lives and forgotten the painted boy who listened to their problems. I would like that. You lie, because it's what he wants to hear, and lying has become as natural as breathing. Morning brings the ritual of packing your few possessions. The mirror goes into a small cloth bundle, along with a hair ornament Tanaka-san gave you months ago, a tiny carved crane that reminds you of better times. Everything else belongs to the establishment and stays behind. Midori watches from his sleeping mat as you prepare to leave. He's 15 now, still young enough to command good prices, but old enough to understand what your departure means. His turn will come eventually, the same choice between different forms of bondage. Will you visit? He asks, though you both know the answer. Perhaps, you say, another lie that tastes like ash. The other boys gather to see you off, a solemn procession of painted faces and silk kimonos. Some offer small gifts, tokens of friendship that you'll have to leave behind since Nakamura-san's one-item rule was clearly stated. It's a final reminder that even your departure is controlled by others. Nakamura-san arrives in a covered palanquin, its black lacquer surface decorated with his family crest in gold. He steps out wearing formal hakama and howari, looking every inch the successful merchant. His eyes appraise you with the same expression he might use to evaluate a bolt of silk, checking for flaws that might affect the value. Are you ready, Kame-kun? He asks, though readiness is irrelevant when you have no choice. You bow properly and follow him to the palanquin. The interior is lined with silk cushions and smells like expensive incense. As the bearers lift you into the air, you catch a final glimpse of the chaya through the small window. Yamada-san stands in the doorway counting coins, already focused on the next transaction. The journey to your new prison takes an hour through streets you've never seen. Edo reveals itself in glimpses between the palanquin's curtains. Merchants hawking their wares, children playing games you remember from your own childhood, women carrying babies strapped to their backs. Normal people living normal lives while you travel toward another form of captivity. Nakamura-san's house sits in a respectable district where successful merchants maintain their secondary establishments. It's larger than the chaya, but smaller than his main residence where his wife and daughters live. The architecture is elegant in an understated way, designed to attract attention without causing scandal. This will be your home, he says, sliding open the entrance door. I trust you'll find it comfortable. The interior is beautiful in the way that money can make things beautiful. Tatami mats without a single stain or worn spot. Shoshi screens with paper, so white it seems to glow. Alcoves displaying flower arrangements that someone changes weekly. It's a stage set for the performance of domestic happiness. Your room is larger than anything you've known since childhood. A proper sleeping area with thick futon and silk covers. A low table for writing or eating. A small chest for storing clothes. Windows that actually open to let in fresh air and natural light. After 3 years in the chaya's cramped quarters, it feels impossibly luxurious. I have business to attend to this afternoon, Nakamura-san explains, showing you through the house. This evening we'll dine together and discuss the arrangements in detail. I trust you remember how to behave appropriately? You assure him that you do, though privately you wonder what appropriate means in this context. The rules of the chaya were clear if unpleasant. Here, you'll have to learn new boundaries, new expectations, new ways to anticipate and fulfill desires. Alone in the house, you explore your new domain. The kitchen is small but well equipped with quality knives and good ceramic cookware. The pantry holds rice, miso, dried vegetables, even some expensive items like sugar and imported spices. For the first time in years, you could prepare a meal according to your own preferences rather than accepting whatever the establishment chose to provide. The bath is a revelation. A wooden tub large enough to actually soak in, not the quick scrubbing you've grown accustomed to. Hot water whenever you want it. Soap that doesn't smell like industrial lye. Towels soft enough to dry yourself without abrading your skin. You spend an hour washing away 3 years of accumulated paint and perfume, watching the colored water swirl down the drain. Without makeup, your reflection in the bathroom mirror looks strange. Your skin is pale from years of avoiding sunlight, marked with small scars from customers who weren't always gentle. Your eyes hold an expression you don't recognize, something between wariness and resignation. The boy who was once named Taro stares back at you, older and damaged, but somehow still present beneath all the layers of awe. Kume. Evening brings Nakamura-san's return and the beginning of your new routine. He's changed from his business clothes into a casual kimono, expensive silk in subdued colors appropriate to his age and station. His manner is different here than it was in the chaya, less customer and more master of his domain. I've had the kitchen stocked with ingredients for your favorite dishes, he says, settling onto cushions at the low dining table. I remember you once mentioned enjoying tempura. The fact that he remembers such a detail from casual conversation months ago unsettles you. In the chaya, customers' attention felt temporary and commercial. Here, his focus has the intensity of ownership. Every preference you've ever expressed, every casual comment you've made, has been cataloged and filed away for future reference. Dinner is an elaborate affair with multiple courses, each one requiring appropriate responses of gratitude and appreciation. The food is genuinely excellent, better than anything you've eaten in years, but it comes with the weight of obligation. Every bite reinforces your dependence on his generosity, your complete reliance on his continued favor. I have certain expectations, he explains over tea, flavored with expensive leaves from distant mountains. You will maintain this house, prepare my meals when I visit, and provide companionship as I require. In exchange, you'll receive food, shelter, clothing, and a modest allowance for personal expenses. The terms sound reasonable until you consider what's not being said. No mention of privacy, of time that belongs to you alone. No discussion of what happens if you become ill or injured, if you displease him, or simply bore him after the novelty wears off. The contract is entirely one-sided, offering security in exchange for absolute control. I understand, you say, because understanding and accepting are different things. That night, he exercises his rights as your keeper with the familiar efficiency of someone reclaiming property. It's not violent or deliberately cruel, just mechanical in a way that somehow feels worse than the passionate encounters of your professional life. At least customers at the chaya maintained the pretense that this was mutual pleasure. Nakamura-san makes no such pretense. Afterward, he holds you with possessive tenderness, stroking your hair and murmuring endearments that sound rehearsed. You wonder if he practiced these speeches, if he's refined his technique through previous arrangements with other boys. The thought that you might not be his first kept companion is both comforting and disturbing. You're mine now, he whispers against your ear. Completely mine. the words settle over you like a blanket made of lead. In the chaya, you belong to everyone and no one, shared among customers who rented your time in measured increments. Here, you belong entirely to one man whose moods and desires will dictate every aspect of your existence. It's a different kind of slavery, perhaps more comfortable, but no less complete. Days blend into weeks as you establish the routines of your new life. Morning cleaning and meal preparation. Afternoon maintenance of the house and garden. Evening entertainment when Nakamura-san visits, which happens 3 or 4 times per week. The work isn't physically demanding, but the constant performance of gratitude and affection exhausts you in ways that purely transactional sex never did. You learn his preferences through careful observation and painful mistakes. He likes his tea prepared with specific timing, the leaves steeped for exactly the right duration. His clothes must be folded in a particular way, arranged by color and season. He prefers conversation about literature and current events, but becomes irritated if you express opinions that contradict his own. The house has no neighbors close enough to observe your daily activities, which is both blessing and curse. You can move freely within the compound, tend the small garden, even walk to the nearby market for supplies. But this freedom is illusory, bounded by invisible walls of dependence and isolation. Where would you go if you left? What would you do without skills that translate to legitimate employment? Nakamura-san provides clothing appropriate to your station as his kept companion. Silk kimonos in subdued colors, nothing flashy enough to attract attention, but fine enough to reflect his status. The obi ties in back now, marking you as respectable rather than available, though the distinction feels meaningless when your respectability belongs entirely to another person. He also provides cosmetics, though you're expected to use them more subtly than in your professional days. A light dusting of powder to even your complexion, a touch of color on your lips, just enough enhancement to maintain the illusion of youth without looking painted. The goal is natural beauty, as if your appearance results from good breeding rather than careful artifice. Your allowance is modest, but regular, 5 mon per month for personal expenses. It's more spending money than you've ever controlled, but also a reminder of your complete dependence. Every coin comes from his generosity and could be withdrawn at any moment if you fail to please him. You use some of the money to buy writing supplies, brush and ink, and good paper, telling yourself you want to practice calligraphy. Really, you want to record your thoughts, to maintain some connection to your inner life that exists separate from your performance as the grateful kept boy. The diary you begin is written in characters too small for casual observation, hidden in the bottom of your clothing chest. The entry starts simple, records of daily activities and weather observations. Gradually, they evolve into something more honest, a place where you can admit your growing despair without compromising your position. Writing becomes a form of resistance, proof that some part of your mind remains unconquered, even if your body belongs to another. Spring arrives with cherry blossoms that bloom in the garden's single tree. Nakamura-san organizes a viewing party, inviting business associates to admire the flowers while you serve tea and provide musical entertainment. It's your first social event since leaving the chaya, your debut as respectable companion rather than obvious prostitute. The other merchants treat you with polite distance, acknowledging your presence without quite meeting your eyes. Their wives weren't invited to this gathering, and everyone understands why. You represent the kind of arrangement that successful men maintain discreetly, acknowledged but not discussed in polite society. One guest, a younger man named Sato, watches you with obvious interest. He asks pointed questions about your musical training, your calligraphy skills, your household management abilities. Nakamura-san answers for you with the pride of ownership, describing your talents like features of a prized possession. Later, after the guests depart, and you're cleaning up the remnants of the party. Nakamura-san mentions that Sato expressed interest in establishing a similar arrangement for himself. Would you know of any suitable boys from your former establishment who might be available? The request fills you with complicated emotions. Part of you wants to protect the boys still trapped in the chaya from this particular form of exploitation. Another part recognizes that being chosen as someone's exclusive companion might represent their best chance for a better life, or at least a different one. Midori might be suitable, you hear yourself saying. He's intelligent and well-trained, still young enough to be appealing. Even as you speak, you hate yourself for participating in the system that destroyed your own youth. But survival sometimes requires becoming complicit in others' destruction. You tell yourself that Midori would be better off here than aging out at the chaya, though you know it's rationalization rather than truth. Summer brings its own challenges. The house grows stifling during the day, and you spend hours maintaining the careful balance between cooling the interior and preserving the expensive furnishings. Nakamura-san's visits become more frequent as his business slows during the hot season, meaning less time alone and more constant performance of contentment. He develops new rituals, elaborate ceremonies around bathing and dressing that emphasize your role as beautiful object rather than human being. You must wash his back with specific motions, arrange according to complex rules about color coordination and seasonal appropriateness. His hair in precise patterns, select his clothing. Each task requires absolute attention and perfect execution. The sexual demands evolve too, becoming more elaborate and time-consuming. What once took minutes now requires hours of preparation and performance. He brings books with explicit illustrations, expecting you to recreate scenes with enthusiasm that appears genuine. The line between intimacy and theater disappears completely. Your body begins showing signs of stress that no amount of cosmetics can completely hide. Dark circles under your eyes from interrupted sleep, a thinness that comes from anxiety suppressing appetite despite abundant food, a tremor in your hands that makes calligraphy difficult and tea service precarious. Nakamura-san notices these changes with the sharp eye of someone protecting his investment. He brings a doctor to examine you, the same physician who used to inspect the boys at the chaya. The man's hands are cold and clinical as he checks your pulse, examines your throat, asks invasive questions about your bodily functions. Nervous exhaustion, he diagnoses, prescribing herbal remedies and more rest. Common in young men who've experienced significant life changes. Nothing that proper care won't remedy. The herbs taste bitter and do nothing for the underlying problem, which isn't medical but existential. You're dying by degrees, not from disease, but from the slow erosion of selfhood that comes with total subordination to another person's will. The remedies can't address the fundamental poison of having no agency over your own life. Autumn arrives with relief from the heat, but no relief from the essential problems of your situation. Nakamura-san's business picks up, meaning longer absences and more opportunities for solitude. You use this time to walk in the garden, to practice writing, to remember what it feels like to move through space without performing for an audience. The maple tree in the corner of the garden turns brilliant red, its leaves falling like scattered blood across the carefully raked gravel. You find yourself collecting the fallen leaves, pressing them between pages of books, as if preserving beauty could somehow preserve hope. It's a child's activity, but it connects you to something beyond the narrow confines of your adult existence. One afternoon, while Nakamura-san conducts business in another district, you encounter a group of children playing in the street outside the house. They're around 10 years old, the age you were when your family still had enough food and your future seemed to hold infinite possibilities. Their laughter carries through the garden walls, a sound so pure it makes your chest ache with remembered joy. You climb onto a stone in the garden that gives you a view over the wall. The children are playing a game that involves chasing each other in complex patterns, their movements governed by rules you can't quite decipher. Their faces are bright with concentration and delight, unmarked by the compromises and calculations that define adult existence. One of them, a girl with her hair tied in neat braids, looks up and catches sight of you, watching from your elevated position. She waves with unself-conscious friendliness, and you wave back before remembering that such interactions might be inappropriate for someone in your position. But the moment of genuine human connection, free from commercial transaction or power dynamics, feels like a gift. That evening, when Nakamura-san returns, you find yourself studying his face with new attention. He's 53 years old, successful by most measures, respected in his community. Yet there's something hollow in his expression, a dissatisfaction that no amount of wealth or control seems able to fill. You wonder if he recognizes the emptiness in himself that mirrors your own. You seem thoughtful tonight, he observes over dinner. Has something troubled you? The question feels like a trap. Expressing unhappiness would be ingratitude, but claiming perfect contentment might seem false. You navigate between these dangers with the skill learned through years of managing difficult customers. I was thinking about the changing seasons, you say, which is true enough to pass scrutiny. How beautiful the garden looks in autumn light. He nods approvingly, pleased that your thoughts focus on aesthetic appreciation rather than anything that might threaten the arrangement. Beauty is safe territory, something that can be enjoyed without questioning the systems that make such enjoyment possible. Winter's approach brings the first anniversary of your arrival at Nakamura-san's house. You mark the date privately, without celebration, as a milestone of survival rather than achievement. 12 months of successful performance, of maintaining the illusion that this arrangement benefits both parties equally. Your diary has grown thick with entries, a secret chronicle of adaptation and resistance. Reading back through the early pages, you're struck by how much you've changed in ways both obvious and subtle. Your handwriting has evolved, becoming more refined and controlled. Your vocabulary has expanded through exposure to Nakamura-san's literary interests. Even your thinking has shifted, becoming more strategic and less emotional. These changes feel like victories and defeats simultaneously. You've acquired skills and knowledge that might serve you well if you ever regain freedom. But you've also learned to suppress authentic responses so thoroughly that you sometimes can't locate your true feelings beneath layers of performance. The winter solstice passes with special rituals that Nakamura-san has devised, ceremonies that blend traditional observances with his personal fantasies. You participate with the same careful attention you bring to all his requirements, but the forced intimacy of shared spiritual practice feels more invasive than purely physical demands. As the year's shortest day gives way to gradually lengthening light, you allow yourself to wonder whether change might be possible. Not escape, exactly, but perhaps evolution towards something more bearable. The thought is dangerous because hope makes suffering harder to endure, but you can't quite suppress it entirely. Your 19th birthday arrives without acknowledgement from anyone who knows your real age. Nakamura-san continues to believe you're 17, an illusion maintained through careful grooming and deliberate vagueness about your past. In his mind, you exist in eternal youth, preserved like the pressed leaves in your books. But your body knows the truth. Your voice has settled into its adult register, requiring, but your body knows the truth. Your voice has settled into its adult register, no longer cracking at inopportune moments. Your shoulders have broadened slightly, requiring adjustments to kimono that once fit perfectly. Most tellingly, your face has lost the soft roundness that marked you as a boy, developing the angular definition of a man. These changes require increasingly elaborate countermeasures. You've learned to apply makeup with theatrical skill using light and shadow to create the illusion of youth. Certain poses and expressions help maintain the deception, but you can feel time winning its relentless war against artifice. Eventually, no amount of powder and paint will be able to disguise what you're becoming. Nakamura-san hasn't noticed yet, or perhaps he chooses not to notice. His business demands most of his attention during the busy winter months when households across Edo stock up on silk goods for the new year. His visits become shorter and more focused, requiring less extended performance, but more intensive satisfaction of his specific desires. You discover that managing his schedule has become one of your most crucial skills. Learning to predict his moods from subtle cues allows you to prepare appropriate responses in advance. When he arrives tense from difficult negotiations, you have sake warmed and a massage prepared. When he comes flushed with success, you're ready with celebration and admiration for his accomplishments. The emotional labor exhausts you more than any physical demands ever did. At the Chaya, customers purchased specific services for limited time periods. Here, you provide constant emotional support, always available, always responsive to needs that can't be clearly defined or easily satisfied. Your companion, entertainer, confidant, and sexual partner simultaneously, with no boundaries between these roles. Spring returns with its cruel beauty, cherry blossoms blooming and falling in cycles that mock human permanence. You've learned to dread the flower viewing season because it brings parties where you must perform for Nakamura-san's associates, maintaining the illusion of contentment while being displayed like a prized possession. This year's gathering is larger than last year's, including men you don't recognize in discussions of business matters that seem unusually urgent. You serve tea and play shamisen while listening to conversations about changing trade relationships, new regulations from the shogunate, pressure from foreign merchants demanding access to Japanese markets. The old ways are ending, one elderly merchant observes, his voice heavy with regret. Young men today don't understand proper relationships between masters and dependents. They want wages instead of protection, contracts instead of loyalty. Nakamura-san nods gravely while his hand rests possessively on your shoulder. Some traditions must be preserved despite changing times. Not everything should be reduced to commercial transaction. The irony is so thick you could choke on it, but you maintain your expression of polite attention while inwardly noting how men who buy and sell, human beings always speak of their activities in terms of honor and tradition. Their moral blindness would be amusing if it weren't so personally devastating. After the guests leave, Nakamura-san seems unusually reflective. He keeps you beside him longer than usual, stroking your hair while staring into the garden where fallen petals carpet the ground like snow. Change is coming whether we welcome it or not, he says, more to himself than to you. The question is how to preserve what matters most. You wonder if you qualify as something that matters, or if you're simply an object he's grown accustomed to possessing. The distinction might be meaningless in practical terms, but it feels important for reasons you can't articulate. That night, he holds you with unusual intensity, as if trying to memorize your physical presence. His love-making is more desperate than passionate, carrying undertones of loss that make you wonder what he knows that you don't. When he falls asleep, you lie awake listening to his breathing and contemplating futures you can't quite imagine. The answer comes 3 weeks later in the form of an official messenger bearing documents sealed with red wax. Nakamura-san reads them with growing agitation, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, anger, and resignation. When he finishes, he sits in silence for several minutes before explaining the situation. New regulations, he says, his voice carefully controlled. The government is modernizing certain aspects of commerce and social relationships. Arrangements like ours are being discouraged in favor of more formal contracts with specific legal protections. You wait for him to continue, recognizing the careful language he uses when delivering unwelcome news. The pause stretches long enough to count your own heartbeats before he speaks again. I'm required to provide you with official employment status as household servant, including wages and specified working conditions. Or, he hesitates, studying your face as if trying to read your thoughts. Or I can provide documentation that you've completed your period of service and are free to seek employment elsewhere. Freedom. The word hangs in the air between you, like smoke from incense, visible but impossible to grasp. You've dreamed of this moment for so long that you're unprepared for its actual arrival. After years of having every decision made for you, the prospect of choice feels more terrifying than liberating. What would you prefer? You ask, though you know the question is meaningless. His preferences will determine the outcome regardless of your wishes. I would prefer to continue our current arrangement, he admits. But under the new regulations, that's no longer possible without formal documentation that might complicate things for both of us. Single quotes. Translation? He's afraid of government scrutiny that might reveal the true nature of your relationship. Better to cut losses and avoid potential scandal that could damage his reputation in the business community. I understand, you say, though understanding and preparing are different things entirely. He gives you 1 week to make arrangements, generous by his standards, though practically meaningless since you have no money saved, no connections outside this house, and no skills that translate to legitimate employment. Your freedom papers will state that you've served as household manager for 2 years, vague enough to avoid uncomfortable questions, but specific enough to provide some employment reference. The days that follow feel surreal, like walking through a dream where everything looks familiar but operates according to unknown rules. You clean the house with extra care, as if perfect maintenance could somehow change the outcome. You prepare elaborate meals that Nakamura-san picks at without enthusiasm, both of you going through motions that feel increasingly hollow. On your final night, he makes love to you with desperate intensity, as if trying to possess you completely one last time before losing you forever. Afterward, he presents you with a silk purse containing 50 ryo, more money than you've ever seen in one place. For your new beginning, he says, though you both know it's payment for services that can't be officially acknowledged. You accept the money with appropriate gratitude, while calculating how long it might last if spent carefully. 6 months, perhaps 8, if you live frugally and avoid expenses like decent housing or regular meals. It's enough to survive the immediate crisis, but not enough to build any kind of sustainable future. Morning arrives with unseasonable chill, as if the weather wants to match your mood. You pack your few possessions into a cloth bundle, including the cracked mirror that's traveled with you from your childhood village. Your official papers identify you as household manager, age 20, seeking new employment. The fiction of your identity has become legal reality. Nakamura-san provides transportation to the commercial district, where employment agencies maintain offices for domestic servants. The palanquin ride feels like a funeral procession, carrying you toward an uncertain fate while leaving behind the only security you've known as an adult. Remember, he says as the bearers lower the palanquin outside a busy employment office, you have excellent references. Any household would be fortunate to secure your services. It's the kindest lie he's ever told you, and you appreciate the effort, even though you both know the truth. You bow properly and watch him disappear back into his world of silk and respectability, leaving you standing on a crowded street with no idea what happens next. The employment agency occupies the ground floor of a wooden building that smells like sweat and desperation. Men and women of various ages cluster in small groups, all seeking work in a city that has more servants than positions. You recognize the expression they all wear, the careful balance between hope and resignation it comes with being completely dependent on others' whims. The clerk who reviews your papers is a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the permanent squint of someone who spends his days reading bad handwriting. He examines Nakamura-san's letter of reference with professional skepticism, noting the vague language and expensive paper. Household management, he muses. Previous employer speaks highly of your discretion and loyalty. These are valuable qualities, though the market for experienced managers is somewhat limited. He explains that most wealthy households prefer to promote servants from within their own ranks, rather than hiring outsiders for senior positions. Your lack of verifiable employment history beyond Nakamura-san's recommendation makes you a risky choice for families who value stability above all else. However, he continues, consulting a ledger filled with job postings, there are opportunities for general domestic staff. The pay is modest, but it provides room and board while you establish yourself. The positions he describes involve cleaning, cooking, and general maintenance for merchant families who can't afford large staffs. The work would be honest but exhausting, a complete reversal from your years of performing beauty and grace for men who could afford such luxuries. You accept a position with the Watanabe family, rice merchants who need someone to maintain their household while the wife manages their shop and the husband travels to negotiate with farmers. The pay is 3 ryo per month, plus meals and a sleeping space in the servants' quarters. Barely enough to survive, but sufficient to avoid starvation. Your new employer is a practical woman in her 40s who wastes no time on social pleasantries. She shows you through the house, pointing out tasks that need daily attention in areas that require special care. The work is legitimate but demanding, requiring skills you've never needed to develop. You'll share quarters with Kenji, she explains, indicating a boy about 15 who works as general servant and errand runner. He can teach you the routine until you find your footing. Kenji reminds you painfully of yourself at that age, before the Chaya, before Nakamura-san, before you learned that survival might require sacrificing everything you once thought was essential to being human. His face holds the openness of someone who still believes the world operates according to fair principles. Your first week in legitimate employment nearly kills you. The physical labor of cleaning, washing, and food preparation taxes muscles you've never used, leaving you exhausted in ways that performing sexual services never did. Your hands, soft from years of careful grooming, crack and bleed from harsh soap and cold water. Worse than the physical demands are the social ones. You have to relearn how to interact with people as equals rather than customers or masters. Kenji tries to engage you in casual conversation, asking about your previous employment and your family background. You construct careful lies, editing your history to create something that sounds plausible without revealing damaging truths. The other servants in the neighborhood form a loose community, gathering in the evenings to share gossip and complaints about their employers. They try to include you in these sessions, but you struggle with the casual intimacy of friendship. Years of performing emotions for commercial purposes have left you uncertain about authentic feeling. You discover that your shamisen skills are completely useless in this context, as is your knowledge of classical poetry and tea ceremony. The cultural education that made you valuable as entertainment has no application in the world of honest work. You're starting over completely, learning practical skills that other people mastered in childhood. Your employer notices your struggles with basic tasks and grows increasingly frustrated with your inefficiency. She expected someone with household management experience to require minimal training, not a complete education in domestic work. Several times you catch her studying you with puzzled suspicion, as if trying to reconcile your supposed background with your obvious inexperience. The crisis comes during your 3rd week, when you accidentally destroy an expensive piece of pottery while attempting to clean it. The crash brings your employer running, and her expression when she sees the fragments tells you everything you need to know about your future in this position. "I don't understand," she says, kneeling to examine the broken pieces. "This was my grandmother's tea bowl." How could someone with your experience be so careless with valuable items? You have no answer that won't expose the lies in your employment history. Standing there surrounded by fragments of irreplaceable ceramic, you realize that legitimate employment might be as impossible for you as legitimate relationships. That night, lying on a thin futon in the cramped servants' quarters, you consider your options. You could confess your real background and hope for understanding, though the likelihood of finding employment with a prostitution history seems minimal. You could construct better lies, though your inexperience with domestic work would continue undermining any fictional expertise. Or you could accept that some transformations are irreversible, that the skills you've acquired and the experiences you've survived have made you unfit for the normal world you once dreamed of rejoining. The decision makes itself 3 days later when your employer dismisses you for incompetence, paying only for the days you actually worked and deducting the cost of the broken tea bowl. You pack your meager possessions and walk back to the employment agency, knowing that word of your failure will make finding another position nearly impossible. The clerk greets you with the expression of someone who's seen this pattern before, probably multiple times that week. His professional sympathy doesn't extend to offering solutions, just documenting another failure in his ledger of broken dreams. "Household management requires specific experience," he observes, making notes with his ink-stained fingers. "Perhaps we should consider positions that better match your actual skills. The problem is that your actual skills can't be listed on employment applications. You can't exactly advertise your ability to maintain erotic conversation while calculating tip percentages, or your expertise in applying makeup that creates the illusion of youth and innocence. 3 years of professional training in the art of pleasing men has left you uniquely qualified for work that's now legally complicated. You spend the next week in a cheap boarding house, paying by the day while watching your money disappear like water through a broken bucket. The other residents are mostly day laborers, men who work construction or dock loading when they can find it. They smell like sweat and desperation, sleeping in shifts on thin futons that haven't been cleaned in months. The boarding house proprietor is a woman who might have been pretty once, before whatever circumstances led her to managing a flophouse for society's cast-offs. She collects rent with mechanical efficiency and asks no questions about backgrounds or references. Privacy costs extra, which you can't afford, so you share a room with 2 other men who snore, cough, and occasionally cry in their sleep. Your new roommates work loading rice barges at the docks when ships arrive, which happens irregularly and pays barely enough to cover food and shelter. They invite you to join them, explaining that the work requires no experience beyond the ability to lift heavy sacks and follow simple directions. It's honest labor, they assure you, as if honesty compensates for the certainty of a shortened lifespan. You accept because the alternative is starvation. The next morning, you present yourself at the docks, wearing clothes that already show signs of your declining circumstances. Your silk kimono has been traded for rough cotton work clothes that chafe against skin accustomed to finer fabrics. Your painted nails have grown out, revealing the damage underneath from years of caustic cosmetics. The dock foreman looks you over with the practiced eye of someone who assesses men like livestock. He notes your soft hands, your pale complexion, your obvious lack of experience with manual labor. But he also sees desperation, which makes workers reliable in ways that hope never does. "You'll start with half wages until you prove you can handle the work," he announces. Full day's labor gets you 1 ryo, assuming you don't collapse or quit before sunset. 1 ryo for backbreaking labor that will probably kill you within a decade. You remember when customers paid more than that for a single evening's entertainment, But those calculations belong to a different life, lived by someone who no longer exists. The work begins before dawn, when the first ships arrive with cargo that needs unloading before the morning heat becomes unbearable. Rice sacks weigh as much as grown men, and you're expected to carry them from ship to warehouse in an endless procession of bent backs and aching shoulders. Your muscles, trained for grace rather than strength, rebel against the demands within hours. By midday, your hands are raw from rope burns, and your back feels like someone's driving spikes into your spine. The other workers show you techniques for lifting and carrying that minimize damage, but their help comes with the understanding that everyone suffers together. No one gets special treatment just because they're dying a little faster than average. Your soft skin splits and bleeds where rough materials abrade against it. The salt from dried sweat burns in every cut and scrape. Your feet, accustomed to silk slippers and careful steps, develop blisters that burst and reform daily. Inside boots that fit badly and offer no cushioning against wooden docks. The other workers notice your struggles, but don't offer sympathy. Dock labor attracts men who've run out of better options, and most have their own stories of former lives that ended badly. They judge each other by endurance and reliability, not by how gracefully someone once poured tea or played shamisen. You discover that physical exhaustion has unexpected benefits. When you collapse onto your boarding house futon each night, you're too tired for the complex emotional processing that kept you awake during your time with Nakamura-san. Your body's demands for rest override the mind's tendency toward destructive reflection, but the work is destroying you in measurable ways. Your weight drops as the physical demands exceed what your reduced diet can support. Your hands develop permanent calluses that crack and bleed in cold weather. Your back begins to curve from constant bending and lifting, aging your posture by decades within months. The other workers warn you about the long-term costs of dock labor. Hernias from lifting too much weight, joint problems that make walking painful by middle age, respiratory issues from inhaling dust and pollutants that drift across the water. Most dock workers are finished by 40, assuming they live that long. But it's honest work, they remind each other, as if honesty provides compensation for shortened lifespans and constant pain. The distinction matters to men who've compromised their integrity in other ways, though you're not sure whether your own compromises were worse or just different. Your former skills become increasingly irrelevant as your body adapts to its new demands. The graceful movements you perfected for entertaining customers now feel artificial and useless. Your knowledge of classical poetry means nothing when your world consists of rice sacks and shipping schedules. Even your ability to read and write offers no advantages in work that requires only strong backs and weak bargaining positions. The seasonal rhythms of dock work follow shipping patterns rather than cultural celebrations. Busy periods when multiple vessels arrive simultaneously require 16-hour days that leave workers stumbling with exhaustion. Slow periods with no ships mean no wages and the constant anxiety of unpaid rent accumulating. You learn to sleep anywhere, grabbing rest during brief breaks between ships or while waiting for cargo to be organized. The skill of finding comfort on hard surfaces serves you better than any accomplishment from your previous life. Your body becomes a tool that you maintain just well enough to keep functioning, not a temple that requires careful preservation. The dock community has its own social structure based on strength, reliability, and the ability to work through injury or illness. Respect comes from showing up consistently, despite pain, weather, or personal problems. The men who earn leadership positions are those who've survived longest while maintaining their capacity for heavy labor. Your position in this hierarchy is precarious because your background shows in ways you can't completely hide. Your vocabulary occasionally includes words that dock workers don't typically know. Your reactions to certain situations reveal unfamiliarity with working-class culture. Some of the men watch you with suspicion, wondering what brought someone with your obvious education to their level. The questions they ask are casual but probing. Where did you work before? Why did you leave? Do you have family in Edo? You construct careful answers that contain just enough truth to sound believable, while concealing everything that would make you unemployable or worse. Household service, you tell them when pressed. Family moved away, didn't need me anymore. It's close enough to the truth to pass scrutiny, while avoiding details that would reveal the nature of that household service. Most workers accept the explanation because domestic employment ending abruptly isn't unusual, and everyone has reasons for not discussing their past in detail. But some of the older workers recognize something in your manner that doesn't match your story. They've seen enough men running from complicated pasts to spot the signs. Their silence isn't kindness so much as professional courtesy among people who understand that everyone's entitled to their secrets. The physical transformation continues as months pass. Your hands become permanently stained and scarred from handling rough materials. Your shoulders broaden from constant lifting. Your face develops the weathered look of someone who works outdoors regardless of conditions. The soft beauty that once attracted customers disappears beneath layers of damage and exhaustion. You catch glimpses of your reflection in puddles and windows, shocked by how much you've changed. The painted boy who entertained wealthy men has been replaced by something that looks more like the farmers from your childhood village. It's not exactly who you were before, but it's closer to authentic than anything you've been in years. The money problems never improve because dock wages barely cover survival expenses. After paying for food, shelter, and the minimal clothing required for work, you have nothing left for savings or improvements. Every illness or injury that prevents working creates debt that takes weeks to repay. You develop a persistent cough from inhaling dust and moisture at the docks. The boarding house proprietor eyes you suspiciously when you cough at night, worried that you might have something contagious that could spread to other tenants. Sick workers don't get paid, and workers who might infect others don't get hired. The herbal remedies that once kept you functional as an entertainer are too expensive for your current budget. You learn to work through minor illnesses and injuries that would have required rest in your previous life. Pain becomes a constant companion, ignored rather than treated, because treatment costs money you don't have. Your diet consists mainly of rice, cheap vegetables, and whatever protein you can afford, which isn't much. The elaborate meals you once prepared for Nakamura-san seem like fantasies from another person's life. You learn to be grateful for enough food to maintain your strength for work, regardless of taste or variety. The boarding house provides minimal amenities for the daily rate you can barely afford. A shared washing area with cold water and harsh soap. Communal sleeping spaces that offer no privacy or security. Meals that consist of whatever cheap ingredients the proprietor can obtain, prepared with minimal effort or seasoning. Your former possessions gradually disappear as you trade them for necessities. The silk kimono that represented your status as Nakamura-san's companion gets sold to buy winter clothing suitable for outdoor work. The writing supplies you used for your secret diary become too expensive to maintain, ending your practice of recording daily experiences. The cracked mirror that traveled with you from your childhood village finally breaks completely when another tenant accidentally knocks it from your sleeping area. You sweep up the fragments and throw them away, eliminating your last physical connection to the boy you were before everything changed. Winter arrives with brutal efficiency, making dock work exponentially more difficult. Ice forms on metal surfaces, making them dangerous to handle. Wind off the water cuts through clothing that seemed adequate in milder weather. Your hands crack and bleed from exposure to cold and moisture, but you can't afford gloves that would protect them. The seasonal reduction in shipping means fewer work opportunities and increased competition among laborers. Men who worked regularly during busy periods now fight for occasional half-days of employment. Your inexperience makes you one of the first cut when foremen have more workers than positions available. You spend days without work, watching your small savings disappear while searching for any kind of employment that might tide you over until shipping resumes. The city is full of men in similar situations, all competing for the same scarce opportunities. Your refined background, once a liability in dock work, becomes completely irrelevant in this broader competition for survival. The boarding house proprietor grows impatient with tenants who can't pay regularly. She makes pointed comments about needing reliable income to maintain the establishment, hinting that non-paying residents might find themselves on the street regardless of weather conditions. The threat is real because homeless people freeze to death regularly during Edo winters. You consider returning to some form of sex work, reasoning that your experience might command premium rates even if your youthful appearance has faded. But the legal changes that ended your arrangement with Nakamura-san have made the entire industry more dangerous and less profitable. Street prostitution carries risks of violence and arrest that regulated establishments once helped minimize. The other option is crime, which many desperate men choose when legitimate opportunities disappear. Theft, extortion, and various forms of fraud offer quick money for those willing to accept the consequences of getting caught. But criminal skills, like sexual ones, require training and connections you don't possess. Your situation reaches crisis point during the coldest week of winter, when you haven't worked in 6 days and owe the boarding house proprietor for multiple nights' accommodation. She gives you until the next evening to produce payment or vacate the premises, regardless of where you might go or how you might survive on the streets. That night, lying on your thin futon, while listening to other tenants cough and mutter in their sleep, you consider the mathematics of your decline. In less than 2 years, you've gone from exclusive companion to a wealthy merchant, to day laborer, to potentially homeless beggar. Each transition has been a step down a ladder with no apparent bottom. You think about the boys still working at the chaya, painted and perfumed and earning money that might seem modest, but represents luxury compared to your current circumstances. The life you once considered slavery now looks almost attractive compared to the freedom that's slowly killing you through poverty and exhaustion. The irony is bitter enough to choke on. You gained your liberty just in time to discover that liberty without resources is just another form of prison, one with walls made of hunger and cold instead of silk and obligation. At least in the chaya, your basic needs were guaranteed in exchange for services you understood how to provide. But there's no going back. Even if the legal changes were reversed, you're too old and too damaged for the youth-oriented market that once sustained you. Your hands are too scarred for elegant tea service. Your face is too weathered for the illusion of innocence that customers purchase. The skills that once made you valuable have been erased by months of manual labor. Morning brings a decision that isn't really a choice. You pack your few remaining possessions and prepare to face whatever comes next. The boarding house proprietor accepts your departure without comment, already focused on finding a replacement tenant who can pay regularly. Your failure is just another entry in her ledger of human disappointments. You walk through the pre-dawn streets, carrying everything you own in a cloth bundle, heading toward the docks in hope that ships might have arrived during the night. The city is quiet except for the sounds of early workers beginning their daily struggles. Smoke rises from chimneys where people who have homes prepare for another day of staying housed. At the docks, you discover that 2 rice barges arrived during the night and need unloading before the morning tide changes. It's work that will pay enough to cover food for several days, assuming you can complete it despite your weakened condition from recent poor nutrition and inadequate sleep. The foreman recognizes you as someone who's worked before without causing problems. He assigns you to a crew, unloading sacks that seem heavier than you remember, though that might be because your strength has diminished along with your circumstances. Every lift sends pain through your back and shoulders, but you continue because stopping means not eating. By noon, you've earned enough to pay for several meals and a night's accommodation at the boarding house, assuming they'll readmit a former tenant who left owing money. The work continues into the afternoon as more cargo appears from the ship's holds, each sack representing a few more coins toward temporary survival. Your hands bleed through the calluses you've developed, leaving red stains on the rice sacks you carry. The other workers notice, but don't comment because everyone bleeds at this job. Blood is just another cost of earning wages that barely sustain life. Accept it as naturally as the ache in your back and the burn in your lungs. Evening finds you exhausted, but solvent enough to negotiate readmission to the boarding house. The proprietor accepts your payment with professional indifference, noting your return in her records without expressing opinion about your reliability as a tenant. You're just another transaction in her daily business of providing minimal shelter to desperate people. That night, collapsed on the same thin futon you vacated that morning, you realize that you've achieved a kind of stability. Not security, certainly not comfort, but a sustainable pattern of work and survival that might continue indefinitely if your health holds out. It's not the life you once dreamed of, but it's recognizably a life rather than the slow-motion death you've been experiencing. The cycle continues through the remainder of winter and into spring. Work when ships arrive, hunger when they don't. Payment for shelter when you can afford it. Nights on the street when you can't. Your body adapts to the irregular rhythms of survival, while your mind gradually releases its grip on memories of better times. Spring brings increased shipping and more regular employment. Your skills as a dock worker improve through necessity and repetition. You learn to judge the weight of cargo by sight, to position your body to minimize injury, to work efficiently enough to complete jobs before exhaustion sets in completely. The other workers begin to accept you as a permanent member of their community, rather than a temporary visitor from another social class. Your refined speech patterns gradually coarsen through constant exposure to dock vocabulary. Your mannerisms adapt to working-class expectations. The transformation isn't complete, but it's progressing in the direction of authenticity. You discover unexpected satisfactions in the work, despite its physical demands. There's clarity in having simple goals that can be achieved through effort rather than performance. Loading ships doesn't require emotional labor or the management of complex relationships. Success is measured in sacks moved rather than customers satisfied. Your body continues its adaptation to manual labor. Muscles that once existed only for aesthetic purposes develop functional strength. Your hands become tools capable of gripping rough materials without immediate injury. Your back learns to bear heavy loads without collapsing, though the cost is measured in daily pain that never completely disappears. The social dynamics of dock work begin to make sense as you understand the unwritten rules that govern interactions. Respect flows to those who work consistently without complaining. Leadership belongs to men who've survived longest while maintaining their capacity for heavy labor. Cooperation is essential because individual workers can't handle the largest jobs alone. You begin to form tentative friendships with other workers, relationships based on shared hardship rather than commercial transaction or power imbalance. These connections feel different from anything you've experienced since childhood, authentic in ways that your professional relationships never managed to achieve. The conversations during rest breaks reveal stories that parallel your own in various ways. Men who've lost everything through bad decisions or circumstances beyond their control. Workers who once held better positions before economic changes eliminated their livelihoods. People who've learned to survive on society's margins through determination and mutual support. Your own story, carefully edited, fits into this community of discarded men. You mentioned domestic service that ended when employers no longer needed your skills. You reference family circumstances that made staying in your home village impossible. These partial truths create enough shared experience to justify your presence without revealing dangerous details. The physical work begins to feel natural rather than punishing as your body completes its adaptation. You can lift and carry loads that would have crippled you when you started. Your endurance improves to the point where full days of labor don't leave you completely incapacitated. The transformation from entertainer to laborer approaches completion. But traces of your former life persist in unexpected ways. Your literacy allows you to read shipping manifests and cargo labels that other workers must have explained to them. Your knowledge of mathematics helps with calculating weights and distributions. These advantages are small, but noticeable in a community where such skills are rare. Some of the more observant workers begin to suspect that your background includes education beyond what domestic servants typically receive. They don't challenge your story directly, but their questions become more pointed. Where exactly did you learn to read so well? Which family employed servants who studied classical literature? You deflect these inquiries with vague references to lucky circumstances and generous employers. But the attention makes you nervous. Discovery of your real history would mean losing the acceptance you've worked to build in this community. Workers who tolerate mysterious pasts might react differently to specific knowledge about prostitution and sexual servitude. The spring season brings its own challenges as increased shipping creates opportunities for steady work, but also attracts more competition from seasonal laborers. Men from farming communities arrive seeking employment during agricultural slow periods. Their fresh strength makes them attractive to foremen looking for maximum productivity. Your advantage lies in experience and reliability rather than raw physical capacity. You understand dock procedures, equipment handling, and safety requirements that new workers must learn through trial and potentially expensive error. Foremen value workers who can complete jobs without supervision or accident-related delays. The seasonal influx of workers also brings news from rural areas that reminds you of your own village origins. Stories about harvest conditions, local politics, and family situations that echo your own childhood memories. These conversations trigger unexpected longing for the simplicity of agricultural life you abandoned years ago. You wonder occasionally about your parents and siblings, whether they survived the famines that drove them to sell you, whether they ever think about the son who disappeared into Ito's vast anonymity. But curiosity about family doesn't translate into desire for reunion, especially given what you've become and done since leaving home. Your current life, while physically demanding and economically precarious, offers something your previous experiences lacked: the possibility of incremental improvement through sustained effort. Unlike entertainment work where aging inevitably reduced your value, dock labor rewards experience and reliability. Workers who survive their first few years often find more stable positions with regular employment. The boarding house proprietor begins to treat you as a reliable tenant rather than a temporary risk. She holds mail for you when letters arrive, though none ever do. She allows you to store possessions in her office when you're working extended shifts. These small courtesies represent progress toward respectability within your reduced circumstances. Your daily routine achieves a rhythm that feels almost normal after months of chaos and uncertainty. Wake before dawn, walk to the docks, work until sunset, return to the boarding house for a simple meal and exhausted sleep. The repetition is monotonous, but reassuring after years of unpredictable demands from customers and employers. Summer arrives with its own complications, as extreme heat makes dock work dangerous for workers who aren't properly conditioned. You've learned to pace yourself during the hottest hours, to recognize signs of heat exhaustion in yourself and others, to find shade and water when available. These survival skills distinguish experienced workers from newcomers who sometimes collapse from overexertion. The increased shipping volume of summer brings opportunities for overtime work that pays premium rates. You begin to accumulate small savings for the first time since leaving Nakamura-san's house, money that represents genuine security rather than temporary relief from immediate crisis. The amount is modest, but significant given your recent near-homelessness. So there you are, 20 years old, standing at the docks with bleeding hands and a back that feels like it's held together with spite and stubbornness. Your savings account consists of whatever coins you can keep from spending on food and shelter. The boy who was once named Taro, who became Kume the painted entertainer, who briefly thought he might be Nakamura-san's cherished companion, is now just another nameless laborer hoping ships arrive with cargo to unload. And you know what? You're still here, still breathing, still figuring out how to survive in a world that never wanted you to succeed in the first place. The system that bought and sold you, that painted you up and rented you out, that promised freedom and delivered poverty, that system is still grinding along without missing a beat. There are new boys arriving at the Chaya every week, fresh faces to replace the ones who aged out or disappeared, or simply broke under the weight of it all. Your story isn't unique. It's just one thread in a vast tapestry of exploitation that stretched across centuries, where children were commodities and survival was a luxury most couldn't afford. The only difference is that you live to tell about it, even if there's no one left who wants to listen. Sleep well, and remember, some scars are just proof that you refuse to give up, even when giving up would have been easier.